Hey, welcome back to another Jet Up Johnny video. I'm Johnny, and today we're going to be looking at wide receivers, and we're going to be ranking them into a bunch of different categories. And there's a lot of guys here. I'm going to try to scroll down. There's a lot of guys here, probably like 80 something, 90 something guys. I didn't make this tier list. Shout out to whoever did. Reset Reset 7. Looks like maybe it's the creator of this tier list. I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can through these because there's a lot of them and I don't want this video to drag on for too long. So maybe I won't get super in-depth analysis of all of these guys, but I'll try to just go quickly through them and try to at least give a little blurb about each guy and why I think they're in the position that I think that they're in. Obviously, unproven receivers will be rookie, second year guys, whatever, that we haven't really seen much of, and I don't feel like we can really evaluate. Some guys that are second year guys, I feel like we've seen enough because they got a lot of reps. Some guys we haven't. And there's two categories for that, and they'll be at the bottom, and those guys might be better receivers than some of the guys that are up higher, but it's just for that tier, the unproven tier, I'm just throwing them at the bottom for now, and they'll be ordered within those tiers for those individual players. Okay, starting off with Adam Thielen. I think Adam Thielen at this point in his career, I'm going to put him in the solid number 2 category. I think early in his career, he would have been up near, probably near stud number 1, honestly, at the apex of his career. He was a really, really awesome wide receiver. Has been putting up numbers for years. It might be a little disrespectful to have him as solid number 2 right now, but that's just the way I see him and the way his output probably will be going forward, with Justin Jefferson being the number 1 on that team for the foreseeable future. A.J. Brown is up next. A.J. Brown, I think, for me, it's a tough call for me between borderline number 1 and stud number 1. I'm going to call him stud number 1. I think he's probably going to end up near the bottom of that, but we'll see going forward. Alec Pierce, new guy on the block in Indianapolis. He's going to be unproven starter potential for right now. That's as far as I can really go without seeing him play a game. He was drafted in the 2nd round, and we'll see, reports say he's having a good camp, so maybe he'll emerge onto the scene quickly. Allen Robinson. Tough year last year, but he's a super solid receiver. For me, Allen Robinson, I'm going to throw him in the solid number 2 category. I'm going to throw him right behind Thielen. But I think Robinson's the guy that, with the Rams now, he might shoot himself back up the boards into maybe borderline number 1 material, which is where he might have even been a stud number 1 at some point in his career. But, he might be able to work his way back up. Amari Cooper is up next. I'm going to call Amari Cooper a borderline number 1, and that might be my first, bold take. You could call him a stud number 1 if you want. You could. And maybe it's unfair for me to put him in the borderline number 1 category. I think he's going to be near the top of this category, if that helps. But that's just where I'm going to put him for right now. Amari Rodgers, it's another unproven guy. We really didn't see much from him. He's going to be behind Alec Pierce in the unproven starter potential category. A lot of opportunity for reps in Green Bay since nobody's really established, so we'll see if he can get himself onto the field. But for right now, that's where he's got to be. Amon-Ra St. Brown up next. So he really emerged onto the scene last year late and had some awesome games. We're going to have him. This is a tough one because he's kind of like that short area guy, and it's hard to make that guy up near the top of a rankings list. For right now, I'm going to put Amon-Ra in the solid number 2 category because he had such a good finish to the last year. Maybe he should only be passable number 2 until he shows it more frequently, but for right now, I'm going to have him in the solid number 2. We'll see. Maybe I'll shift him down if I start having too many people in that category, but I'm going to leave him there for right now. Brandin Aiyuk, another solid number 2. I'm going to have him ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, actually. I know that Aiyuk had a kind of slow start last year. He was kind of in Shanahan's doghouse, but he really rounded into form. He's had 2 relatively solid years coming out of being a first-round pick, and I think that he could maybe elevate himself. He might get 1,000 yards this year. We'll see. Brandin Cooks, he's super underrated. I'm going to have him in the borderline number 1. I'm going to have him ahead of Amari Cooper. I don't want it to seem like I'm hating on Cooper. I think Brandin Cooks is super underrated. I think Amari Cooper is a really solid receiver. I just think Cooks is super underrated. He's been doing such consistent work for so long with so many different teams, and I think that says a lot about the guy individually. Bryan Edwards, he's going to be our first number 3/depth guy. He's only had a couple years to showcase, and he hasn't had a ton of reps, but at the same time, he's had a couple years and hasn't gotten on the field much, so I think that speaks a little bit too. He's going to have more opportunity this year with Atlanta, but for right now, he's going to be in the number 3/depth category, maybe leaning more towards depth. Treylon Burks, he's going to be unproven star potential. I really love his ability after the catch, and I'm excited that he's going to probably have a decent amount of volume in Tennessee this year. People, lightly compare him to Deebo Samuel, and that's probably not fair because that'll get some lofty expectations for the role that he might serve. But I'm excited to see what he has to offer, and I think that what he has to offer is star potential. So he's going to be the first one in that category. CeeDee Lamb, that is a stud wide receiver ahead of A.J. Brown, in my opinion. If I could just slide him there, sure. And I think this is a year that he could probably make the leap to elite, especially because a lot of focus is going to be on him. If he can step up to the task in Dallas, that he might jump into the elite category. For right now, we're going to leave him in stud number 1. He's going to be ahead of A.J. Brown. Chase Claypool. This is a hard one to judge for me. Somewhere between solid number 2 and passable number 2. I'm going to have him in passable number 2 for right now. I think that he's so young that he could definitely work his way up the board. But for right now, I think passable number 2 might be the fairest way that I can assess this. Christian Kirk. I'll put him in a solid number 2 category. I'll have him ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown because Kirk's been around for longer. I think that maybe Amon-Ra has the ability to pass him. But for right now, I'm going to put Kirk ahead of him. Cooper Kupp, that's our first elite receiver. His season numbers spoke for themselves last year. Unbelievable, unguardable, just a tremendous season from Cooper Kupp. There's not much else you can say. He's an elite wide receiver, and I don't think that you can argue against that. Corey Davis up next. So Corey Davis, last year, I would have said solid number 2, and I would have felt very comfortable about that. I'm going to throw him into passable number 2. I'm going to put him right behind Chase Claypool. I really like Corey Davis. I think he's a pretty reliable guy. I know he suffered from some drops last year, but I really do like Corey Davis, and I think he's a solid guy. He's going to be a passable number 2 wide receiver. Courtland Sutton, I know he's emerged, but he could really emerge with Russell Wilson throwing him the ball. He's going to be a borderline number 1. I'm going to have him behind Cooper and Cooks because I don't think he's proven enough to be ahead of those guys. And we'll see if he can elevate his game even higher with Russell Wilson. Jamison Crowder, so super reliable guy for a lot of years. I think at this point in his career, I'm going to make him a number 3. I think he's going to probably end up near the top of this because I think he's super reliable. But he's going to be a number 3 because I think that's just the type of role that he's best suited for at this point in his career. Curtis Samuel, here's a guy with a lot of potential. I think there were some high expectations for him coming to Washington last year, and they didn't really come to fruition, and that was a lot due to injury, but I think just in general, he underwhelmed a little bit, and so I would like to see what he can do this year, but for right now, he's going to be in the number 3 category between Crowder and Edwards. Because with Crowder, I just think that we have a bigger workload that we can judge, and we know what we're getting from him. Okay, Davante Adams up next. This is another elite guy. This is a very difficult decision. I'm going to have him behind Kupp just because he was so unbelievable last year, and it's hard to put anybody above him right now. Davante Adams maybe is a better receiver, but I'm curious to see what he'll be without Rodgers. Deebo Samuel up next. He's another guy that I think I'm going to put him in a stud number 1 category. I'm going to have him ahead of Ceedee Lamb. Deebo had an unbelievable season last year, even with not as good quarterback play as a guy like Ceedee Lamb had with Dak Prescott. So I'm going to have Deebo right there. Some people might argue that he should be elite. I'm going to leave him in the stud number 1 for right now. And if he piles on another season like he did last year, then sure, we can throw him in the elite category. Devin Duvernay up next. This is a guy that has been mostly a returner in his football career. I think maybe for that reason, I'm going to put him in the unproven category. And I think his role might expand this year. I'm going to put him in the unproven category, but I'm going to have him below Rodgers just because I really don't know what we can expect from him out of the wide receiver position. Devonta Smith up next. So he's a guy that is, obviously we've only seen 1 year of him, but I did like what I saw, and I think that what we saw was at least, I'm going to put him solid number 2. I'm going to have him ahead of Kirk and St. Brown in the solid number 2 category. Definitely a guy that can find his way up the rankings pretty quickly. DeAndre Hopkins up next. This dude, I can't put him anywhere other than elite, and I'm sorry, but I know he's getting older, but I haven't seen him not be elite. He's going to be below Kupp and Adams, but this dude is just unbelievable, and he has been for probably 10 years now. Stefon Diggs, back-to-back elite guys we got right here. Diggs is going to be, he's going to be ahead of Hopkins and behind Adams for right now. He's got the advantage of having Josh Allen throw to him, which is a huge advantage, but at the same time, he did the same thing in Minnesota, not to the exact extent, but he put up great seasons in Minnesota. So Diggs, I think, is at this point is established as an elite wide receiver. Diontae Johnson. So Diontae Johnson, this is a harder one. I think he's maybe a borderline number 1 guy. It's a kind of a tough choice between him and Courtland Sutton. I'm going to have him behind Sutton. I think Johnson's a little bit younger, so, he's got the opportunity to evolve maybe past him as he gets closer to the age that Sutton is now. But Sutton also has the advantage of having Russell Wilson right now. So those will be an interesting 2 guys to kind of compare and see which directions they go from where they are right now. DJ Chark, so he had some good years early on in his career, and he's kind of fell off the radar a little bit, but now he's got a new opportunity in Detroit. We'll see how much of a role he can cut out in Detroit. I think at this point, I'm going to have to put him in the number 3/depth category. His upside will have him over the other guys, just because I think that there's still a lot of upside there, but for right now, that's where I'm going to have to put him until he shows us another season where we can really rely on him. DJ Moore. So DJ Moore, he's a guy that's probably a borderline number one. This is a tough call. Another tough call. I'm gonna have him behind the guys that I've already listed here. I think it might be a tough road for him this year with the quarterback position. Not that he's had a very easy road so far in his career, but we'll see. He's a young dude. DK Metcalf. He's a borderline number one guy. He's going to be ahead of Sutton, Johnson, and Moore, and behind Cooper and Cooks, who've established themselves for more years than Metcalf has. Metcalf, another guy who might struggle this year a little bit because of his quarterback situation compared to what he was dealing with last year. But the talent is so obviously there. Drake London, another unproven guy, star potential. Probably a hot take. I like Burks' potential a little bit more than London. This is kind of the lame excuse, but his separation ability worries me a little bit. Sometimes his routes look a little chunky to me. I know that his catch point ability and his ability to just get contested catches is probably unmatched, especially among his age group. And so maybe that'll carry him. I do think that he's definitely got star potential. For me, I was a little more intrigued by the prospect of Burks than London. Elijah Moore. So I'm a Jets fan, and I got to see Elijah Moore like up close and personal. And so he actually really started exploding in the middle of last season before he went down with an injury for the last 5 weeks or so. I'm very high on Elijah Moore. I think for right now, all you can really say about him is that he's a solid number two. I'm going to have him ahead of Kirk and Brown. Dwayne Eskridge. Eskridge is a guy that it's a tough call whether to throw him in the depth category or whether to put him in the unproven category. I'll throw him in the unproven because I don't think he had much of a chance last year. Maybe I'll throw him ahead of Duvernay, and I think that's where I'll leave him right now. Eskridge might have an opportunity to get the number 3 spot behind Lockett and Metcalf. We'll see if he wins that, and if so, we'll get a real good look at him this year, and I'll be excited about that. Russell Gage. So Russell Gage kind of got a little bad luck to a certain extent because Julio Jones signed with Tampa Bay, and Gage might have lost a big chunk of his targets. And Gage, I'm not super high on Gage anyway. I think he's a number 3 depth guy. I'm going to have him behind Crowder and ahead of Samuel and Edwards. Gage had some bright moments with the Falcons. To a certain extent, maybe that was an achievement because at some points during his career in the last couple years, it seemed like he was one of the only wide receivers that there was available to throw to. But I can't rely on him more than I can rely on a guy like Jamison Crowder. Michael Gallup. I think Michael Gallup at this point is at least a passable number 2, maybe a solid number 2. I think it's probably fair to call him a solid number 2. I'm going to call him a solid number 2, and I'm going to put him ahead of Kirk and St. Brown. Garrett Wilson. This is going to be another unproven star potential guy. Garrett Wilson, I think he's got the ability to do basically everything. I'm going to have him ahead of Burks and London. I think Wilson was the best wide receiver in this rookie class. It's not letting me put him ahead of Burks. Maybe it's trying to tell me something, but I don't care. I want him ahead of Burks. I really like both of those guys, and I don't dislike London. It's just I had the slight worry about whether his game will translate to the NFL level against the top level NFL cornerbacks, and I could very well be proven extremely wrong. Chris Godwin, I think, is a borderline number 1. I'm going to put Godwin behind Cooper and maybe ahead of Metcalf and Sutton. That's a tough call for me. I don't know how people are going to react to this, honestly. I don't know if they're going to think I'm underrating him. Some people probably will. Some people probably think I'm overrating him. But I'm going to slot him in right there for the time being. AJ Green, this is obviously a guy that was one of the top 3 wide receivers in football for a couple years, 5 or 6 years ago, but not that guy anymore. I think he's just a number 3/depth guy. If you want to put him give his respect factor ahead of Chark and Crowder, I'll do that. I'll give him some respect because I think he's probably still got, he's got solid hands, but I don't think that he's explosive or dynamic enough anymore at this point in his career to be any higher. Mecole Hardman, that's another guy that's going to be in the depth. It's tough for me to slot him very high because he's had Mahomes to work with, and he's had some opportunities and he hasn't exploded, and that seems like the easiest quarterback to break out with. I'm going to have Hardman behind Gage and ahead of Samuel. Marquise Brown. So Marquise Brown, I'm not super high on him as much as I think other people are. I think Marquise Brown is a solid number 2, and I think... call me crazy. I'm going to throw him behind Devonta Smith. I think that Ravens fans, well, who knows how they feel about him anymore, but I think, some people are probably going to be a little disappointed with where I put Marquise Brown, but I don't know, I'm not super impressed by him. I know he did have some early breakout last year, and he ended up having a pretty good season, but I don't see him as that number 1 guy. At least, I don't see him as that guy yet, and, he's still young. I could be proven wrong. Jahan Dotson, I think that's another guy. He got picked in the first round. I'll put him in the star potential category. I'll have him behind Burks and London and Wilson. But I think that, he's another dude that had really great potential coming out of Penn State, and I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Jacoby Myers. This is a tough one. I think he's shown some good flashes. I think that on a normal team, I still think that he's probably a number 3 guy / depth guy. I'll put him behind AJ Green. I'll put him ahead of DJ Chark because I think Myers, I don't know, I don't feel great about Jamison Crowder falling this far behind, but Myers has a little more youth to him, and maybe I can feel comfortable with throwing him there. Jamar Chase, I know he's only had 1 year. He's elite. I think out of a respect factor, I think I'm going to have DeAndre Hopkins still higher than him. Hopkins is just, he's so legit. I know he's got a suspension coming up, but I don't know. Until I see Hopkins really slow down, I'm going to have him ahead of Chase because he's earned it. Jamison Williams, another star potential guy. I'm going to have Williams. I think Williams probably would have been the first wide receiver off the board if he didn't have the injury. And so for that reason, I'm going to have him pretty close to the top. I still think Wilson was probably the best all-around prospect at wide receiver, but I think Jamison Williams, there's obviously that explosive ability that's just undeniable. For that reason, I'm going to have him ahead of Burks in London. Jarvis Landry, at one point in his career, easily solid number 2, maybe borderline number 1. For right now, I'm going to have him as a passable number 2. I'll have him ahead of Corey Davis and maybe behind Chase Claypool. I think Landry has certainly slowed down to a certain extent, but I do think that he's still a super reliable guy. Jerry Jeudy hasn't broken out as much as people might have thought he would at this point in his career because he was such an early pick, but I think he will break out this year. We can't really give him too much credit yet. I'm going to have him ahead of Elijah Moore, behind Marquise Brown to start the year, and I think Judy's a guy that really might climb, but I don't think that I'd be able to say with a straight face that he's ahead of these other guys yet. Justin Jefferson, another elite guy. We're going to have Justin Jefferson number 3 so far, behind Adams and Kupp. Adams and Kupp have been doing it for so long. I really think by the end of this year, Jefferson might be number 1. I think that is a real possibility. But I'm going to wait until we see one more fantastic year, which I fully expect, until I can put him ahead of Kupp and Adams. Juju Smith-Schuster. So he's a guy that really burst onto the scene early in his career, kind of fell off the radar a little bit, but now he's going to Patrick Mahomes, and that's a big help to his career. I think Juju is a solid number 2. I think that's fair. I think that he's proven more than Elijah Moore. I'm going to slide Juju in right there behind Judy and ahead of Elijah Moore. Some people have gotten too low on Juju, I think. I think that he'll probably have a bounce back year to a certain extent because of the volume that will be available to him in the Kansas City offense. And so maybe he can regain some of the respect from fans. Julio Jones, one of the legends of the game, definitely slowed down at this point. I think Julio Jones is probably, at this point, this feels so disrespectful, but at this point is probably a passable number 2 until he can really prove that he can stay on the field and stay a reliable option at his age. Last year was a little bit of a letdown. He's going to be ahead of Jarvis Landry. And I'll leave him behind Claypool because I think Claypool's got a little bit more of that youth, that burst, but that it feels disrespectful. And I really hope that he forces his way back up the list because I love Julio Jones. Keenan Allen. So Keenan Allen is a stud number 1, maybe even elite. He's definitely a stud number 1, and he's been doing it for so long. He's going to be behind Lamb and Samuel and ahead of A.J. Brown. Kenny Golladay, not sure what the Giants were doing last year and how they couldn't find a way to use him because I think he's a definitely solid wide receiver. I think that he was a borderline number 1 wide receiver when he left Detroit, and I guess his stock has gotten knocked down, but it's so crazy to me that it got so far knocked down. I'm going to throw Golladay behind Judy and ahead of Smith-Schuster. I can't believe how far Golladay has fallen because he was such a young rising star. We'll see if he can reclaim some of that this year. KJ Osborne had a few good games last year as a third wide receiver in the Minnesota offense, but there's no way I can make him any more than number 3 or depth at this point. I'm going to have him ahead of Curtis Samuel and behind Mecole Hardman. There's a lot of wiggle room there for him if he takes on a bigger role this year. That's where I'm going to have him right now. KJ Hamler, guy that's really been hurt by injuries, but he's got a big opportunity this year to be maybe the number 3 wide receiver for the Broncos, and I think that could be a nice role for him. Right now, he's only a number 3 or depth guy, and he's gonna have to be behind Samuel. We really just haven't seen Hamler. I just don't feel like I can put him ahead of many people, although I do think that he had potential coming out of college. Laviska Shenault, he kind of lost some of his role last year. He ended up with a similar season to his rookie year, I think, but it kind of felt like his role wasn't very solidified. And I thought that he was a guy that might break out with Trevor Lawrence, but he didn't. And I think at this point, he's a number 3 guy, number 3/depth guy. I'm going to have him ahead of Russell Gage and the other guys, behind Crowder, who's more established as a veteran and reliable guy. But Laviska Shenault definitely has some more upside that, maybe if Jacksonville finds a way to utilize him more, then maybe he'll rise up these rankings a little bit. Allen Lazard, possibly the number 1 wide receiver for the Packers, but I think he's a number 3/depth guy. I don't think that it would be fair to put him any higher than that. Honestly, maybe I'll have him ahead of Laviska Shenault, but I don't even know if that's fair because I don't know how much we've seen from Lazard. Of course, there's the chance that he breaks out this year because he's one of Aaron Rodgers' only weapons that he can choose from. But I don't know. I don't think that we can realistically put him any higher than that. Tyler Lockett's still got some juice left in him. I know that it's going to be a real big struggle leaving Russell Wilson, who, like, they had such good connection. But Tyler Lockett, you can't put him any lower than a solid number 2. And I think he's proven more than a guy like Jerry Jeudy, so he's going to slide in between Jeudy and Brown. I'm going to put him ahead of Brown. And Lockett, unfortunately, is a guy that might end up going down the list because of the switch at quarterback and because of his age creeping up towards that number you don't like to see as a wide receiver. But I have a lot of respect for the guy. Terrace Marshall, so we didn't really see too much from him. He's an unproven guy. We're going to have him ahead of Rodgers. I think that he might have an opportunity to be the number 3 guy in Carolina this year, so maybe second year he'll have some sort of emergence. Marvin Jones, so he's been a really solid, at least number 2 guy for most of his career. At this point, I think at most we can call him a passable number 2. I'll slide him in ahead of Corey Davis and behind Jarvis Landry. I think he's a pretty similar story to Jarvis Landry, but I think maybe Landry's got a little more juice left in him. No pun intended. Terry McLaurin, he's a guy that I think is a borderline number 1. I don't know, maybe people aren't going to like that, but I think he's a borderline number 1. And I think the list of people that he'll be with on this tier makes sense. I'm going to have him ahead of Diontae Johnson and DJ Moore. And behind Sutton. It's a tough call between him and Sutton. I'm just betting on Sutton taking that extra leap this year. John Mechie III, really tough break for him, really rooting for him now, and I'm hoping the best for his health and for his football future. He's going to be an unproven starter potential guy. I'll have him ahead of Marshall because he's a rookie. These other guys behind him have had at least a year to prove themselves and haven't burst onto the scene. And Mechie, maybe he would have this year, and maybe he will in his first year when that day comes. Mike Evans is a stud number 1, at least. You could make the argument for elite, but he's a stud number 1. I'm going to have him ahead of Keenan Allen and behind CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb and Deebo Samuel are just a little more dynamic, but Evans is just a dominant wide receiver. Mike Williams is a tough one for me to judge. I think he's a solid number 2. I think that's where I'll end up putting him. I'm going to put Mike Williams. Maybe his youth will leave him ahead of a guy like Tyler Lockett. That's a tough call. It's a tough call with a real row of these guys. I'm going to leave Mike Williams right there. And that might be higher than where I thought I was going to have him, and maybe I'll regret it. Darnell Mooney, so he's going to be a solid number 2. He had a pretty solid year last year and not such an ideal position. Maybe I'll have him ahead of Jeudy and behind like Marquise Brown. I think it's a close call between him and Brown and like a Mike Williams. That type of group is pretty close call-ish to me. Marquez Valdes-Scantling has never really broken out. Can't really put him any higher than number 3/depth guy. I'm going to have him ahead of Hardman. I don't know. That's a tough call. They're both going to be fighting for targets in the Kansas City offense, and we'll see which one of them emerges. It'll be probably at the disadvantage of the other guy, honestly. So anyway, Nelson Agholor. I think he's a depth guy at this point. We're going to put him... I think his experience maybe puts him over some of these other guys. Not over too many of them, though. I think maybe behind Cage and ahead of these other dudes. I don't think Aguilar is too reliable. I think he's got some deep threat ability, but I don't know how much more other than that. Odell Beckham, he's had such injury problems, and I think you could argue that he's still a borderline number 1. I think you really, at this point, you got to make him a number 2. I think, out of respect, I'll throw him ahead of a guy like Aiyuk. I'll have him ahead of Allen Robinson, too. But I'm not going to put him ahead of Adam Thielen, who I think has just been so consistently good. Chris Olave, another unproven star potential guy. I'm going to have him ahead of Dotson behind the other 4. I think he's going to have a great opportunity in New Orleans this year. Olamide Zaccheaus, another depth guy. Hasn't really been able to show us much. He's going to be right on the same tier as Bryan Edwards. I'll throw him maybe behind Bryan Edwards because I think Edwards maybe has an inside track towards getting one of the spots for the Falcons. Devontae Parker, he's a guy that I kind of liked when he was in Miami, but recently he hasn't been doing as much as he once was. He'll be moving over to New England. I don't know. I think that Devontae Parker is maybe a passable number 2. I'm going to have him behind the rest of the guys in that category, though, for right now. George Pickens, I think, if you asked me like a couple weeks ago, I would probably just had him in the starter potential category. I don't know. He's had such a great camp. I'm going to put him at the end of the star potential category. Not that distinction is crazy between the two, being at the front of one category, being at the end of the other. But out of respect for the camp he's having and the fact that he's won a starting job for the Steelers, I'll throw him in the star potential category. Michael Pittman, I think you could easily call him a borderline number one so far based on he had such a great year last year. I'm going to have Pittman behind Terry, above Diontae Johnson. Quez Watkins, another depth guy. Don't have too much to say about him. He's going to be behind KJ Hamler and ahead of these other two guys. I know that Watkins has some dynamic speed to him, and so maybe there will be a role for him in the Eagles offense, but we'll see. Rashad Bateman, we really haven't seen too much from Bateman. I don't think that we've seen enough from Bateman to put him over many guys, but I'm going to have him in the solid number 2 for right now, and he could definitely rise up beyond that. I'm going to have him behind a Gallup ahead of Christian Kirk. Jalen Reagor, a lot of potential obviously coming out of college, has not lived up to it yet. He's a depth guy. It's hard to say, I'll have him ahead of Hamler and the rest of those guys in the category. I can't really put him much higher, unfortunately. Hunter Renfrow, he put up such a good year last year. I know that he's like a slot guy, and maybe people like kind of think of number 3 when they think of that. But just as an option, he's probably a solid number 2 option in the same way that like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, in the same way that I kind of qualified him into that category. And I think that he had such a solid year that it's like, I got to put him ahead of some of these guys. I don't know, maybe it's disrespectful. I'm going to have him down there between Bateman and Kirk. Maybe I should have him higher based on the numbers that he put up. But I just feel like in terms of ability, I feel better about the guys that I have ahead of him. Calvin Ridley, when he's allowed to play, he's a borderline number 1 guy, and I feel very confident about that. I think Ridley is probably right behind Metcalf and ahead of these other guys, maybe even ahead of Metcalf. I'm going to put him behind Metcalf, but I think Ridley's a legit dude. He can really play the wide receiver position when he's allowed to. Robbie Anderson, big disappointing year last year. I was expecting bigger things from him last year. Reconnecting with Sam Darnold. Obviously, that whole thing didn't work out, but Anderson kind of was he was dropping balls. He wasn't himself, but I haven't fully lost faith in him. I think Robbie Anderson maybe is a passable number 2. I'm going to have him ahead of Devontae Parker and behind Corey Davis. There's still something there with Robbie Anderson. Robert Woods is a solid number 2. He's been doing it for such a long time. He's going to be ahead of Aiyuk because he's been doing it for so long and has been just such a reliable guy. Allen Robinson, that's a tougher call. It's funny, all these dudes with the connection to the Rams. I don't know. I'm going to have Woods behind Robinson and Beckham. I think Robinson is so talented, and I think that last year people might have forgotten that because he wasn't utilized as much. Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore is one where it's tough to call at this point in his career. I'm going to have him in the depth category right now, ahead of his teammate AJ Green, because I think that he'll have more of a role than AJ Green, if I had to predict. But I'm going to have to see more from him to elevate him into a different category. Sterling Shepard he's been a really solid receiver for a while. I think Sterling Shepard is a passable number 2 guy. Maybe ahead of a Robbie Anderson, just because I think you can rely on Shepard to be more consistent. I think Shepard is a guy that's really overlooked. He's had some injury issues that have kept him off the field a little bit, but I do like Shepard. Sky Moore, I'm going to have to put him in the starter potential category. Obviously, the destination he ended up in gives him the potential to be a star, and for that reason, maybe I should have him in the star potential category. You know what? I'll do it, because I don't want to look like an idiot when he just goes off for the Chiefs, but I'm going to have him behind the other dudes in the category. Darius Slayton, he's a depth guy. He had some okay years with the Giants, and I think that he's probably like a number 4 guy, number 4 like deep threat type of guy for a team. And that isn't to say that he isn't great for that role, because I think he is. I think there is a definite use for him on a football team, but I'm gonna have him ahead of a guy like Allen Lazard, because I think that we've seen more from Slayton than Lazard. T. Higgins, another solid number 2. I have a lot of people that are solid number 2s. T. Higgins, we're going to have behind these veterans and ahead of some of these younger guys that are in the same kind of tier. I think it's a hard decision with some of these dudes, but I think maybe we've seen more from Higgins than we have from the next couple guys. Michael Thomas, I know we haven't seen him in like 2 years. Michael Thomas is still a stud number 1 for me until we see him not be that. I'm going to have him ahead of A.J. Brown and behind these other dudes. And maybe he'll end up looking bad if he's not able to recreate what he once was with Drew Brees. But I'm going to play the respect game. Tim Patrick, unfortunate ending to his season way too early. He could have had an opportunity to maybe explode onto the scene with Russell Wilson at quarterback. I think that he, to me, is a depth guy. I'm going to have him ahead of Darius Slayton. I think maybe a similar type of role, but maybe more upside to Patrick than Slayton. Kadarius Toney, he sounds like he's having a great camp. Obviously, he had that one like crazy good week with the Giants last year, and he definitely seemed like he was emerging, but he dealt with some injuries. If he can stay on the field, I think that there's a lot of real great potential with him. For right now, I don't think it would be fair to put him ahead of a guy like Hunter Renfrow, just because Renfrow did such a good job last year, and we haven't seen enough from Toney. But I kind of like his upside a little little more than Kirk and St. Brown. Tre'Quan Smith, this is another depth guy for me. I think that he serves a decent role for New Orleans, and I think it's going to be tougher for him to find a role with the weapons all coming back and with new weapons in the fold. I think that it would probably be fair to put Tre'Quan maybe right ahead of Jalen Reagor, because we really haven't seen much of anything at all from Reagor. And Tre'Quan, we've seen on the field making some plays for New Orleans. So that's where I feel comfortable putting him. T.Y. Hilton was a great wide receiver for a number of years. Not really that guy anymore. And I'm not even sure. I don't think he's on a team right now. I'm not sure whether he's going to latch onto a team or not. I'll still judge him based on his ability. Out of respect, I got to, have him near the top of this number 3 depth category. Out of respect, I'll have him right next to A.J. Green. I think they're kind of in a similar boat where they're not quite what they once were. They both have that veteran experience that's kind of like priceless to a certain extent, and I think that you can rely on those guys. Tyler Boyd definitely gets overshadowed by the 2 other guys on his team, but I still think he's a solid player. Maybe he's just a passable number 2, but that's not really, in my opinion, that's not a slight to him. I'm going to have him ahead of Claypool. I'm going to have him at the top of the passable number 2 category. I really think Tyler Boyd is a perfectly fine starting, top 2 wide receiver on a team. And it just so happens that he's the number 3 because they have such a great group of wide receivers. Tyquan Thornton, he's going to be an unproven guy. I'm going to have him behind Mechie because I like Mechie as a prospect better. I think New England kind of picked Thornton a little bit earlier than people expected. And maybe there's a master plan there. But for right now, I'm going to have him ahead of those other guys that have had a year, but behind Mechie and Pierce. Tyreek Hill, finally we're dipping back into the elite category. We're going to have Tyreek number 5 behind those other dudes. I'm a little hesitant to put him any higher until we see him without Patrick Mahomes. Maybe he puts up a season close to what he's been putting up, and I'll have to move him higher, because if he does, that's ultra impressive. But I also don't think that it's a slight to have him behind guys like Diggs, Jefferson, Adams, and Kupp, who are just unbelievable wide receivers in their own right. Van Jefferson, I think, is a number 3 type of guy. He's still young, so he might develop into more than that. I'm going to have him right behind Crowder and ahead of Tim Patrick and Slayton. I think some of these other dudes have maybe a little more upside that they've flashed or a little more reliability, but I do think we've seen some nice things from Van Jefferson. Jalen Waddle. So he had a great rookie year last year. We're going to have him in the solid number 2 category. Man, he had such a good year. I think I might have to have him right there, right behind T. Higgins. It's a tough call for me between Devonta and Waddle, and obviously where does Aiyuk fall in that range? But Waddle he had such a great year last year, and I think that I need to put some weight into that. Wan'Dale Robinson, another rookie. I'll throw him in the starter potential unproven category. I think I'm going to put him right behind Alec Pierce. I think Pierce is going to have more opportunity out of the gate, but I think Robinson will be utilizing the Giants offense a decent amount. And I like that pick for the Giants. I think it's smart to keep getting some weapons that are really dynamic. Sammy Watkins, he's been a tough guy to analyze, I think, his whole entire career. He's a guy that's bounced around, and I think he's a solid dude. You can rely on him to a certain extent. I'm going to have him right behind Crowder. I feel like Crowder's a little more reliable. Finally, Christian Watson. He should have plenty of opportunity in Green Bay to emerge right away. And I think in a similar way that I did with Moore, I think because he's playing with such a good quarterback, I have to put him in the star potential category. But it is a tough call for me. I'm going to have him right behind Sky Moore, but he's definitely got the chance to really emerge with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Okay, so here's our final tier list. I hope it's not getting too cut off by my face up in this corner. But so in the elite category, we've got 7 dudes. We've got 6 dudes in the stud number 1 category. And then we've got another 10 guys in the borderline number 1 category. That adds up to 23 dudes that are number 1. So maybe I should have had more dudes. But at the same time, it's not like every team's going to have a guy that you're really wow, that's a number 1 dude. And so then, you add in, 6, 11, 22 plus 9 more. So that's 31. 31 dudes that I had in the number 2-ish category. I think to a certain extent, this kind of makes some sense. And then plenty of dudes in the depth category. And then maybe these star potential guys are the ones that fill in these gaps to make it more like 32 and 32 for the number 1s and 2s. And some of those guys making leaps up, whatnot. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I know there's some guys that even I will probably look at this and say, oh, they should be higher. Or maybe I put them a little too high. Maybe I'm putting too much stock into a certain thing about this person. But I'd really love to hear what you think. And I'm not going to take offense if you disagree with something, as long as you say it in a respectful way. Because this is me I'm going through this in real time. And it's hard to make those decisions without knowing what's coming next and without, I didn't pre-plan any of this. And so this is what I got in a real quick run through. Some of these young dudes are going to rise up. Some of these older dudes are going to fall down. This is just taking stock of how I felt right now in this moment. But yeah, if you watched this, thank you for sticking around. This is probably longer than I wanted it to go, but I think I maybe did a decent job of kind of running through some of this pretty quickly, considering there was like 90 dudes to go through. Hopefully I'll be able to get another video out next week of some sort. So if you want to subscribe, that would be great. Look out for more videos in the near future. If you liked this, please leave a like. That would be great. Comment what you thought. Comment who should be in a different spot. But I'm excited for the football season to come around. Thank you for stopping by. This has been a Jet Up Johnny video from yours truly, Johnny. Thanks, guys.